"Who's going to win this war?" said a ruthless, pitiless Japanese soldier to my grandfather, who had been in this prisoner of war camp since the middle of the Second World War. "America," he replied with a smile. The Japanese soldier slapped my grandfather right in the face. He turned around, he walked out of the prisoner building and walked into the administrative hut. My grandfather stood there, alone and hurt. A few months later, Japan was bombed by the United States and America won the war. My grandfather was right. The prisoner of war camp that he was in was liberated by the Australian 9th Division and he was free. Now, there is no possible way that my grandfather could have known that this was happening. The conditions he was suffering at this camp were completely unbearable. 2/3 of the prisoner of war at the Batu Lintang internment camp died from tropical ulcers, dysentery, malaria, and other shocking diseases. The food there dramatically declined ever since the war began. People were forced to catch rats, mice, snails, frogs, cats, and even dogs, and eat them. Now, if I was at that prisoner of war camp, I would think that we were all doomed. We were all going to die. There was no possible way that the Allies could have won this war. But my grandfather stood strong. Why? Well, nobody really knew back then. None of the Japanese knew why they were so positive. There was no TV, there was no radio, there was no newspaper, there's no way they could have known. But they had a secret weapon. Lieutenant Colonel M.C. Russell. He was a British soldier who was contained in that prisoner of war camp. And he ordered the construction of a secret weapon. A secret weapon that was so special. So special that if the Japanese found out, they would have shot every single one of the prisoners. It was a secret radio. Now this radio would have been extremely hard to make in the prisoner of war camp. So around the prisoner of war camp, they saw that a particular group lived that they would have been able to relate to. The ethnic Chinese. The ethnic Chinese were on the side of the Allied. They were under the Kuching rule, and they really did not like it, and they really wanted the Allies to win. So the prisoner of wars used this to their advantage. One of the prisoner of wars asked the Japanese soldier if they could go out to the dense forest and kill mosquitoes that were causing malaria. So the Japanese soldier said, "Yes, you can do that. It's not only going to affect you, but it will affect us, the guards." So the prisoner of wars went out, they killed all the mosquitoes, and one of them ran into the city and made contact with a family member of his who he somehow contacted before, and he smuggled in all these genuine radio parts. He went back to the camp, they put all the radio parts together so that they could really find out what was going on in this war, but there was a problem. There wasn't enough radio, there wasn't enough parts to make a working receiver. Now this was a problem for them. But not all hope was lost, because someone had a hearing aid that they donated. Someone had a messy army tin. Someone had soap containers. Some of the prisoner of wars even stole parts from Japanese motor cars and Japanese motorcycles. And they put them all together, and lo and behold, they made a radio. They really made a radio. They were able to hear speeches from all across the world. They heard speeches from Winston Churchill, from Dwight D. Eisenhower, and it really boosted their morale, and it really made them think they were going to win the war. My grandfather heard all of this, and he was so happy that there was a chance that he could be free and go back to his home country, to go back to England, where he originally came from. Now, when my grandfather heard about VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, when Nazi Germany finally surrendered to the Allied and the Third Reich came to an end, he knew with 100% certainty that America, Australia, that the Allies were going to win. And he told that into the Japanese soldier's face. And though it got him a slap, he knew that it was a slap of ridicule, and a slap of embarrassment, and a slap of absolute fear, because the Japanese probably knew that they were going to lose. And a few months later, on 11th of September 1945, Australians marched into that prisoner of war camp. They drove out the Japanese, they took my grandfather, and they saved him. They saved him from a death march he was going to go on 2 days later. The death march where they force you out, walking just walking on the hillsides until you die from thirst, from starvation, from heat stroke. Now, as soon as the Australian soldiers marched into that camp, they were so strong, they were so bulky, they were the biggest people that my grandfather had ever seen in his life. Now, but the Australian soldiers had to turn back, they cried, because they weren't the big ones, it was the people, the soldiers, the prisoner of wars that were so small. They would have died, they were on the brink of death. But my grandfather, he lived it, he survived. And his legacy will continue on throughout our family, his bravery, and he became free. So, I love you, Grandpa.